this deferred meeting of the investment board. I apologise for last Monday, but other matters came to the fore, and as some of you will be aware, we had to accept the devolution deal on behalf of the West Midlands from Michael Coe. So that's why we weren't able to make it last Monday. So the officers have very kindly rearranged, and I'm pleased that some of you have been able to get here in person today. I'm advised that we are quorum, so we can make decisions as we progress through the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies. Councillor Jones, Councillor O'Boyle, Councillor Piper, Councillor Simpkins, Nick Abel, Paul Brown and Sue Summers.
Thank you. Notifications of substitutes, if any?
None today.
None advised. Thank you. Declarations of interest, if any. Members are reminded of the need to declare any disclosable community interest that they have in an item being discussed during the course of the meeting. In addition, the receipt of any gift or hospitality should be declared where the value of it is thought to have exceeded £25 for gifts or £40 for hospitality. I'll declare a non-personal, non-pecuniary interest as a director of the Urban Growth Company, which is referred to in item 10 on the agenda. Councillor Grinsell.
Thank you, Chair. Just declare an interest in item 10, obviously non.
Thank you. The minutes of the meeting have been previously circulated. I'm just taking those as a true record. Are there any amendments required at this point in time? None indicated on the screen. I'm assuming that those are reflecting the actual meeting. I therefore take item 5 on the agenda, which is again in the papers. This is the investment programme update. I'm going to pass to Ian Martin to give us the highlights, and then we'll just discuss the dashboard if appropriate. Ian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Investment board will note that in January the year-end figures hadn't been completed, so we were working on October-November figures. It's the first board where we've got date figures. I can say that the funding commitment remains the same at £53.7 million, confirmed from the income streams approved by CA board. This is fully utilised by earmark contributions approved by CA board. Costs incurred drawings to the end of the year to 31st December is £502.8 million, so we're truly over halfway. Since the last update in December, the statutory officers have approved their scheme delegations. The extension of a date on UKC Longabout to December 24, regeneration project at UKC Road House of £495,000, which is approved within a solid envelope of funding as has no increase. An extension of date for Coventry South package to March 24. Movement of two figures of budget between sprint schemes, but no extension of the financial commitment. Project extension date for Sutton Coalfield Gateway, and a business plan awarding £1.65 million to Net Zero Neighbourhood. That comes from the envelope of £5.1 million previously approved as that envelope by the CA board for projects in the green space.
Thank you. Any questions on the report itself before we just take the dashboard items? Unindicated, it's just for noting there's no decision associated with it. It's a normal report that we take at each of the investment board meetings. As there are no indications, I'll just move on to the dashboards. Are there any matters you just want to bring to our attention on the dashboards, please, Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There are a number of projects showing red, but these are on a completion date at the moment. The board will note that a later agenda item should deal with quite a few of these matters and turn those, hopefully, subject to approval, back into more green status. They're largely due to delays in projects rather than financially increasing commitments. I would like to flag, though, to board that we received a change request for Coventry City Centre South at our meeting 17th of October. The report included the completion date of March 2033 for the project. The project's continued at pace, so the CPA public inquiry has been held in January. The revised planning consent to provide the additional housing received its approval in January as well. The target construction date for practical completion, the final part of the scheme, is now looking like April 2036. The scheme's due to start on site demolition in early 24. Coventry need to sign a commercial contract with Hill, the chosen developer, to deliver that within the next days or weeks. That's in its final state of negotiation. And I would much appreciate if there was delegation of any dates that change, including a long stop date to the chair and a section 151 officer, so that can be completed with commercial expediency.
Questions? None. So in essence, the explanation just been given by Ian. He's asking for the board to approve a delegation to myself and the section 151 officer in relation to any issues relating to Coventry City Centre South. Is Councillor Bird?
Yes, Chairman, where will we be if costs increase to a level that we find unacceptable? Will that come back to the board? Because obviously as costs are increasing in inflation, we've seen this already with some schemes, and in view of the fact there's quite a long stop date on that one, even I might not be here. Don't cheer. No smiles, please. I just wondered whether in actual fact there will be something built into those delegations, and if costs are severely overrun, then it'll come back to the board.
Thank you. Ian, can you advise?
Yes, certainly. So first of all, in terms of the delegation, I'd like to see, that's just this one time only to get the contract.
Right.
This isn't a continuous thing throughout the project. I'd come back and report, I think it's so commentary.
It's understood.
That's fine. Thank you for the clarification. That's important. And the costs are really fresh because Hill have been working with Coventry to do that. The scheme is very fresh, so it is reflecting today's costs. The agreement that Coventry have got with Hill, from what I've seen of it, does allocate grant over phases, so it's quite sensibly constructed to protect if the scheme stalled because of inflated costs. And of course, we all hope that although costs increase, at some point values will increase to match it, and therefore the profit's the same for the developer. We've got a lag at the moment, is the best way to describe it, in terms of where values are not going up at the same level as costs.
So in essence, it's a single delegation for this particular item. You okay with that?
Apology, Chairman, I misunderstood.
No, that's fine. Any dissent? I think we all agree that that delegation can be incorporated in the minutes and reflected accordingly. Thank you. I'll now move to item 6. It's an update report on City Regional Sustainable Transport Schemes, Charter 3 for year 22-23. Carl, here.
I am. Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, our £1 billion transport fund that runs from 22-23 to 27. This is the Q3 update. The board asked to see regular updates on this in November, and this fulfills that requirement. And essentially to go over anything that's changed between Q2 and Q3 and provide an update on progress on delivering the programme. The recommendation set out for the board to acknowledge one of the big milestones that's happened over the last quarter, which is submission of a change request for the programme to DFT, and then the latest feedback we have from project promoters on their progress in Q3. So as many members of the board will be aware, in December, there was a report to CA board that set out general capital programme pressure across TFWM, WMCA capital programme that highlighted the need to find £17.8 million to cover those immediate pressures. The solution for covering those pressures was to move money from Transforming Cities Fund, an earlier transport programme, to cover those off. And to do that requires a change controls to be submitted to DFT to allow us to incorporate those costs into the CRSTS programme. That change control form was submitted and has been presented back to DFT and is currently with them for their approval, which we're expecting imminently. So that helps with existing capital programme pressures, but does put an additional pressure on the CRSTS programme, and that is currently in train. That's probably the major update and movement in terms of progress between quarters. The second one that's worth highlighting is that the board, CA board, in March, further capital pressures across the non-CRSTS schemes were noted as being 53.4 million, which were approved as a solution needing to be found, as CRSTS being a potential route for that, with further information to come back to CA board on how that would affect the CRSTS programme in June. So officers from across the region will be working on coming up with the options for how those cost pressures are dealt with and what the impact is on the CRSTS programme in that June report. So fair bit of work to do over the next couple of months on that. In terms of the Q3 returns, lots of information asked for by DFT for this quarter. Interestingly, strangely, on your opinion, this is their end of year quarter, even though it's not the end of the municipal financial year. So they wanted an awful lot of information, and that's because that feeds through to the Secretary of State for Transport to approve next year's funding. So we have complied with that. Lots of information. All scheme promoters responded and provided their information on time, which was excellent. So thank you to that in terms of local authorities for doing that. Overall, progress in that quarter fairly significant. Large number of strategic outline business cases were submitted and approved, and now we have around 40% of the £1 billion programme has now been approved, with a spend at Q3 at around 61 million. We obviously expect that to increase by the time we get to Q4 and financial year end. Some of those projects that have been approved as they go through the business case stages: A454 in Wolverhampton, very light rail programme, cross city bus priority routes in Birmingham, Bose Hill transport package in Coventry, the A461 in Sandwell and Dudley, and the A4123 corridor, which cuts across Sandwell, Dudley and Wolverhampton. So an awful lot of projects going through the process and going through the business case approvals and getting further funding for development over the next year or so. Key risks, as you would expect currently, and I think it's been touched on by Councillor Bird, inflationary pressures, and these projects are not immune to that, and that is something that is being looked at closely as the programme develops. The other obvious key risk is the impact to schemes outside CRSTS, so we've touched on the need for those to be funded and whether CRSTS is the appropriate mechanism to do that. A point that is worth the board noting is currently 55% of the projects in the programme are estimated to deliver in the final year. So it's a very back-heavy programme, and so again, there's work to do there, with 39% of those in the very final quarter. So we have a lot of estimated programmes delivering right up to the back end of the programme. Some good news, good to finish on some good news. I think at the budget recently, and as part of our devolution deal, Treasury announced and DFT announced a proposal for a second round of CRSTS, so CRSTS 2 from 27 onwards, again, which gives us the opportunity for further transport investment in a consolidated way over a 5-year period, and may well provide some of the financial resilience we may need to complete projects currently on the books. So I'll stop there for questions, Chair.
Thank you. Just to make the board aware, we receive a quarterly report with regard to the CRSTS funding. So I think as time progresses, we'll become more attuned to what's being proposed. But as has been said by Carl, the 55% elements of the projects or programmes are at the latter end. So clearly that's quite a substantial risk that we have to give consideration to. It's responsibility, not least because of the Single Assurance Framework and the rules under the CRSTS, that we do take an active role in monitoring the programme as it progresses. Are there any questions or clarification? Councillor Burr.
Yeah, Carl, you mentioned that you transferred, was it the whole of the 17.8 million that we requested, or was it just part of that?
Yes, so we've requested, apologies, we've requested the full amount transferred from TCF, and those projects we moved into CRSTS. We're just waiting the approval from DFT. Early indications are there is no issue with that, but they do have their own assurance system to go through, which, to be honest, as this is a new fund, we were the first to go through the change control process. So I think they're working out the mechanism of how that approval comes back to us. But in principle, there were no issues with the approach we were taking.
A parochial question, Chairman. I see Aldridge Station was due to have a submission in March 23, as we like into April next week. I just wonder whether you could give me an update on that. And finally, just to express my concern over the constant overspend on all transport schemes. It seems to me that we get this almost daily, weekly, monthly, and then the magic wand comes out and everything's all right again. And that bothers me. And that's not a criticism to you, Carl. It's a criticism of whether in actual fact we need to look at the schemes and say, look, we've got a wish list here that we can't do now, and then prioritise the ones that we think we should do and take out the ones into 27 when the next CRSTS scheme comes forward. That possibly would be not for this board, but for somebody else who knows more about it than me, which is probably most people. But I think we need to look at those priority schemes and find out which ones we could perhaps push into the long grass for now.
You'll answer that now, Carl.
Yes, happy to. So Aldridge is very close to coming in. It's been in, and I think there's comments back on that business case. And if it may well be April, but it's more likely to be the first weeks of April. So it is coming through, and he's already in the assurance process, and the business case is there for approval to go from SOBC to ABC. So a relatively significant amount of development funding there should be released to progress that project. And yes, I think the June board report will start to tackle some of those issues you've raised. We do need to talk to DFT to try and understand what the rules of CRSTS2 might be. We don't quite know yet how it fits into our single pot and our Devo deal. So some of those questions will need to be picked up with DFT, but they're certainly on our agenda for future conversations. And yes, transport pressures, capital cost pressures are indeed the biggest risk, I think, as noted in the report for all of these programs. Okay,
Thank you. Councillor Grinsell, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just really around the soft contingency fund that you've got. Clearly, you've just highlighted the risks that you've got to the programme. If by any remote chance there was anything left over, get to the end, it may well be taken up, with increased costs, inflation, etc. But what are we allowed to do? And you've just said that you're going to have those conversations. Are we allowed to roll over, or are we allowed to bring in projects? Because obviously we had a whole list, everybody had got a wish list. Are we able to bring in other smaller projects that may use some of that contingency potentially?
Yep, there is. I think there's a couple of points there. So the contingency, soft contingency, as highlighted, isn't real contingency. DFT would not let us have contingency. All the money must be allocated to a project. The soft contingency is a mechanism where we approve up to 950 million. So we don't approve beyond. We keep £100 million back should it be needed. The likely indications are it will be given the pressures we've got. In terms of change control for projects that are in the programme, we can locally do change control. So if we need to increase or decrease a budget within overall in the programme, that is allowed, and kind of a soft version of devolution that we currently have at the moment. We don't currently know what the rules are for CRSTS2, so it is important to have that conversation. When CRSTS was originally announced, it had a very hard deadline if you need to deliver everything by 2027. I think given where we are in the world, maybe I don't want to speak for DFT without having these conversations, but I would hope that they are revisiting that given where we are with delivery of infrastructure, inflationary pressures and the announcement of the CRSTS2. So that is a good point for us to pick up when we talk to DFT about what the requirements for CRSTS2 might be. Unfortunately, I could be wrong, but I don't think we will have any money left over. But we do have a reserve list of schemes as well, and there is ability through the change control process to add new schemes onto that reserve list, because the world does change. A 5-year programme is a long programme, and clearly lots of things can happen over that period.
Yeah.
That's good. We get further information. June, anyway.
Any other questions or comments? It's just an update report. Take each quarter. Okay, I think we'll thank you, Carl, for your extra. Thanks for the report. We now move on to our normal set of items 7, 8, and 9. These are the public elements of the dashboards. We have the collective investment fund, the SIF dashboard, urban and property development fund dashboard, and the revolving investment fund dashboard. I'm going to pass to Nick if there are any comments that are required at this point in time. We'll go into further detail during the private elements of the meeting. Nick, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you say, these are the public information dashboards. I'll provide a full update on the dashboards during the private session.
Questions on the public elements of the reports? None indicated. You'll therefore take those for noting. Thank you. We now move on to items for consideration. The first item is item 10 in your papers at page 51. Is SMBC UK Central Investment Programme. It's a rebasing change request. Alan, thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I've had some challenges connecting to the network. I think there's quite a security system in our council. So I'm going to plug in the USB here to see if I can give a very brief presentation about this item. Thank you.
Oh, I can see it now. Okay.
Thank you. Well, the UK Central Programme is our infrastructure development programme within Solihull, which complements the HS2 investment. It's a portfolio of projects, which I think most board members will be familiar with. I'm joined in this presentation by Ian Riley, who's joining us online, our finance manager, who may be able to answer questions at the end if necessary. And essentially what this is about is we've reviewed the overall projects within the programme, and as you would expect, there are some adjustments that are required, having undertaken some studies on the various range of projects and the needs of the council and other environmental considerations as strategic things change, and therefore we've made some adjustments to the projects within the programme. And we've also considered the impact of the trust funding on the overall allocation, and therefore the change request considers the movement between budgets, considers the impact of that also. So we've submitted this to the Combined Authority at the end, just before Christmas, so it's been considered by the investment panel, and this presentation was given on the 27th of February. So we're just seeking an endorsement of that. Some key points to note with the change request is that we acknowledge that some of our projects have become delayed. COVID had an impact for various reasons, particularly on the transport projects where the patterns of movement changed. Some of our consultants were unable to undertake much work during that period of time, and consultation became deferred, etc. So one of the points to make is that we're not requesting any extra money. We're just moving some minor variations of budgets between the projects within the overall programme, and neither are we changing any scope within the programme on any of the projects. And we don't think there's any strategic changes or impacts to the overall programme. They're essentially minor adjustments. There's no change in outcome, outputs or risks. And we don't think there's any material impacts in terms of interdependencies. And finally, this change request doesn't include the accelerated housing projects, which we have as a separate sort of programme within the council. A change request on those projects will come forward later in the year. And another point to make is that you'll see at the end of the papers in your pack, so the narrative about the individual projects adjustments, the reason why the adjustments have been made, and the final page is a Gantt chart showing the new time periods for the projects as we just reviewed. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Can we just note at page 69, 70 within the report, it's the commentary with regard to each of the stages of the projects and why delays have occurred or otherwise. So I just want members to note that. I'm just going to take a comment from Ian Martin. Can you turn your microphone up, Alan, please? Of course.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Quite a while ago now, the role of the board was extended to monitoring, and the investment board dashboard is a way of doing that. There's a lot of these projects that have been showing red on completion date for quite some time. So the work by Solihull and rectifying that is welcome. We need to be vigilant, I think, with sponsors that people are reporting through any delays on any projects kind of with regularity. We're under increasing scrutiny now by HMT. This isn't a West Midlands Combined Authority alone issue. All combined authorities are being subject to a lot more scrutiny in terms of what are they delivering with their money, how are the programmes running, how good are we at monitoring. So this is welcome. We need to have these things straight, and we need to have robust monitoring systems.
I think that's right. In essence, as you know, we have a gateway process in place every 5 years, but as Ian quite rightly says, we are under constant scrutiny, certainly from Her Majesty's Treasury. So I think to have a change request with this level of detail, I think is a good step forward as far as I'm concerned. Any other points or questions before I go to the recommendations? There are 21 projects in all that are within the list. Some, there's a timeline of up to 6 years in some of them, but clearly we'll keep a watching brief on where these go from time to time. And as Alan quite rightly said, the housing elements will come back for a further change request to a future meeting of the investment board. So are there any questions? Can you drop the presentation off the screen, please, Alan? Thank you. Good. I can't see any indications on the screen, so I'm assuming everyone's content with the proposals within the report. No dissent. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. And Ian wasn't needed at the end of the day.
Straightforward.
We now move to a further change request. This is for Coventry Station Master Plan Phase 3. It's item 11 in the agenda at pages 73 to 102. So it's quite a comprehensive report that you have before you. Colin, I think, is going to take the report. So I'll leave it with you, Colin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just introduce myself first of all. Colin Knight, Director of Transport and Highways at the City Council. With me, I have John Seddon, who's our Policy and Innovation Manager at the City Council. And at the end, we have Simon Clifford, who was our project sponsor for the project from Network Rail. So what I want to do is to just first of all, very quickly take board through the background to the scheme, and then to really set out the reasons behind why we are asking for the change in the long stop date as set out in the recommendations. So the scheme background really came back from 2013 when we commissioned what we called a Coventry Rail Story, which identified a series of investments in rail in Coventry in response to the challenges posed by High Speed 2 And also because, you know, passenger growth at Coventry at that time was huge. We were fastest growing station outside of London, and we'd gone from a station designed for 2 million people in the early 1960s to one that was taking the best part of 8 million people pre-pandemic. So there was a huge safety need, if nothing else, to do that. We also have ambitious plans to redevelop the city centre, which I think are well known to this board, and including the Frygate area immediately around the station. So the whole point about this was to, you know, create an appropriate gateway to the city and help promote inward investment into Coventry. And this was an £82 million project, which included 39.4 from the CA, with match from the local enterprise partnership and the city council. So just very quickly, I won't go into detail on this, just remind people first of all, what we set out to deliver, which was basically a large extension to the existing station, which lies to the east of Warwick Road, which is the main route north-south in that diagram. And then critically, as we'll be talking about the Bay platform and the transport interchange there to the west of Warwick Road. So in terms of what we've delivered to date, phase 1 was the footbridge, canopies, and also the tunnel under Warwick Road, which I'll come back to briefly in a minute. But you see that completed. Phase 2 was a 600+ space multi-storey car park, ancillary buildings, which again has now been successfully completed and was opened in March 2022. So if we move on, this is just some outside shots. We've effectively created 3 new entrances to the railway station. So this is, you know, very much in line with TfWM's thinking, you know, improving connectivity, making, you know, Coventry Station a proper mobility hub, proper transport interchange. And if we move on, you can see there sort of loop for taxis between the old and the new station buildings. And then the next one, we see the transport interchange, which lies to the west of Warwick Road. And again, you know, this is very much, I'd say work in progress. We've made passive provision for very light rail or rapid transit, whatever mode of transit that comes in along Warwick Road. And, you know, this is about really giving us flexibility in the future to, as I say, to develop this as a state-of-the-art transport interchange. And I think it's fair to point out that, like all transport projects, has already been alluded to this morning, you know, this project was no stranger to price increases. We delivered this throughout the pandemic, which was challenging with the contractors. We had issues with supply chains and rising prices. So, you know, we had all of those difficulties. And if we, you know, move on to talk a bit more about the Bay platform, one of the reasons why we came to you with a change request back at the end of 2020 was because the tenders for the Bay platform came back at more or less double what they were originally supposed to be. And at the same time, we had the cost overruns to deal with on the other parts of the station. Hence, at that point, we asked for the 10 million to be sort of transferred to phases 1 and 2. But at that point in time, we had agreement from Department for Transport that the Bay platform was added to what they called their integrated project pipeline. And subject to business case, we were assured that that would be funded. Now, we also were working with Network Rail at that point, and we held a large meeting with engineers from all sectors of the business, because this was important, you know, the freight sector, passengers, signalling, all elements of Network Rail, to look at what the art of the possible would be in the Bay platform. The tenders had come back at about 25, 26 million. We sort of challenged the engineering assumptions, and there was agreement around the table that that it was possible to aim for a project in the sort of 10 to 15 million pound range. On that basis, Warwickshire County Council and ourselves then invested in a GRIP 3 study to be led by Network Rail to develop the solution to, you know, deliver within that amount. I really cannot comment what happened, other than to say, after a protracted period of time, the output of that GRIP 3 study was a scheme costing not much different to what the original cost estimate had been, and therein lay the problem. So immediately it became, poor value for money in DFT eyes, because the benefit cost ratio, as you can see on the slide, was around 1.1. So although it washed its face, it was not representing great value for money. So if we move on to the next slide, and and some of the reasons for that poor value for money were, first of all, down to the impact of COVID on rail patronage. So, the assumptions had to be reworked on much reduced passenger numbers. And, and it's predicted not to be until about 2026 when passenger levels may return to pre-COVID. So that made one big dent in that. There was also, of course, further cost increases, materials increases. So unfortunately, everything convened against us. Coincidentally, money had then been taken away from DFT anyway. So, there was a question mark, even if we had have demonstrated value for money, would DFT at that point have had the money to have invested in this? So therein lay some real problems. We have at the moment a situation where patronage on the Coventry and Nuneaton line is relatively modest. We know that there's absolutely no appetite through West Midlands Trains or others at this point in time to run additional services, because that line in particular suffered bigger decreases than most because it ran with buses throughout a lot of the COVID period. It was a bus substitution line. So, there is a real issue that we're starting on the back foot a little bit with this one. And so, that's all the downside. So what are we doing about it? So what we're looking at is saying, right, what are our options for moving forward? Network Rail, in the meantime, have done a strategic review of the Coventry area. And so 2 of their proposals are to remodel the Coventry station area, remodel the track layout, and crucially, to look at building a Coventry East station. WMRE at the same time are doing a study of future rail stations throughout the West Midlands, including Coventry East, which is one that's receiving support. Coventry East, if built, could well provide the capacity, the facility that we need to provide the additional services on Coventry and Nuneaton. And I think a really important point to make here is that, we should be looking here at what the outcomes are. The outcome we want to achieve are additional passenger services on the Coventry and Nuneaton and ultimately Coventry, Nuneaton, Leicester, Nottingham corridor. So that's I think a really important point. At the same time, we've been working with Midlands Connect on looking at reconnecting through to Leicester and Nottingham. And the Knuckle project, of which this is part, and Knuckle is an acronym of Nuneaton, Coventry, Kenilworth, Leamington. Knuckle was always about a bigger strategic plan. That is, looking at improving connectivity both north and south of Coventry. And this ties in with work to redouble the Leamington line, but crucially to reconnect the Coventry-Leicester line at Nuneaton and enable those connections to the East Midlands towns. Again, that work would require a bay platform or equivalent facility at Coventry. So if you may recall the project, the change request that was approved in December 2020 included a caveat that if the DFT case proves unviable, which it did, then the backstop would be to deliver the bay platform or equivalent through the project to reconnect Coventry and Leicester. So that's where we've got to. So, as I say, so clearly we're not going to achieve the long stop date of March 23. And hopefully just gone through some of the reasons why that is the case. What we fully intend to do is to continue to work with our partners at Midlands Connect, Network Rail, County Council, TfWM, WMRE, of course, as well as West Midlands Trains, on looking at both interim and long-term options. In the short term, we've issued a challenge to Network Rail on what I would term preferential engineering. I think talking to Network Rail, they've got a saying or a statement now they call minimum viable product. And what we're saying is, what is the minimum we can do to get passengers using a bay platform at Coventry? So, let's challenge again what seems to be an over-engineering. And, we will be meeting later this year, hopefully late spring, with Network Rail and with their sort of technical colleagues, to have a challenge of some of those engineering standards. We have commissioned Midlands Connect to work on looking at timetable changes. So there have been timetable changes. We have lost a couple of services on the Coventry corridor. Now, appreciate at the moment, it's all about reliability, resilience in the timetable. But going forward, you know, changes to the timetable, changes in the way trains are platformed at Coventry do open up the possibility that at least in the medium term, it would be possible to achieve those additional services to Nuneaton without the provision of a bay platform. Now, part of the interest for Midlands Connect here is that you could improve connectivity to Leicester and Nottingham at a stroke by having 2 trains per hour, because the interchange at Nuneaton suddenly becomes a lot easier. It's not the panacea. We want the physical connection, but recognising that that's going to be into the 2030s, you know, we are pushing for a solution in the mid-2020s. So I think, you know, that's a really important point to make. And of course, what we are doing is working on looking at what the long-term solution would be, whether it's a bay platform at Coventry, whether it's a turn-back bay platform at Coventry East, or some other piece of infrastructure. And Chair, I'd like to draw attention of the board to the recommendations, where recommendation 3 is Coventry asking for the wording to be slightly changed by the addition of or equivalent infrastructure. Because, you know, just want to emphasise that, you know, we believe this is about achieving the outcomes, which is enhanced services on the Cov-Nuneaton corridor, and whether the bay platform is the right piece of infrastructure or not. I think, you know, that is something now that we need to take a wider strategic view on, which is something that we're doing with the rail sector. So that's where we're at. This is not an ask of this board for any additional funding. We are looking to fund this through other means. Our ask today, Chair, is, you know, can we set the long stop date back to December 31, following discussions with Rail and Midlands Connect colleagues, and can we substitute the wording or equivalent infrastructure? So thank you.
Thank you. Comment?
It's a very difficult one to comment on. I mean, therefore I can forward.
This is only a test, by the way.
Won't be
Goes on forever.
Anyone wants to get a drink in the meantime, now's the time to do it.
You've got time to go to Costa Coffee in the middle of the morning.
Right, that's pretty much
You
it.
reckon that's it?
Yeah, one day there'll be a real fire at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday. Yeah, it's difficult to speak about, because obviously the change request we approved, the 10 million switch to fund cost overrun on the car park was and we've got today's situation where the platform may not be needed. The situation for the WMCA in Coventry as a council body is we must be able to prove that £39.4 million delivered the benefits and a reasonable justification about why not. Is that, referring to my earlier comment, is where we are at justifying things. So we do need to see that impact and delivery, and we have got potential alternatives suggested by Coventry at the moment. We don't exactly know which potential alternative may be delivered, or indeed, if any, there's no certainty on them.
Thank you. I've got Steve Clark's hand up on screen. Steve, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair. I'd just like to raise a point on this, that the scheme seems to be in its current form unaffordable. So I'm not quite sure what the purpose is to pushing back the delivery date by 8 years whilst retaining the £10 million funding that could be probably utilised elsewhere with outputs delivered sooner. So I wonder whether you could comment on that, please.
Colin?
The previous change request agreed for the 10 million to be spent on phases 1 and 2. I mean, I would suggest that, you know, we are still, by the recommendations, we are still bound to deliver either a bay platform or equivalent infrastructure to provide, as I said earlier, the additional services on the Coventry to Nuneaton line. So I don't think Coventry, you know, through the recommendations, we're being let off the hook. What we're asking for is, particularly in view of the wider strategic reviews being undertaken by Network Rail, the strategic advice from WMRE, and the work by Midlands Connect, that there are a number of alternative funding options which we'll pursue, and we remain fully committed to delivering, you know, enhanced services on that Coventry to Nuneaton corridor. That is an absolute requirement, not only for local services, but for regional interconnectivity too. So I can only say that the absolute intention is we're not asking for any additional funding. What we're asking for is an extension to the date by which all of the outputs that we were required to do originally will be delivered.
Steve, do you want to come back?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I just think it's just utilising the money. It's if it's just staying within this profile for the next 8 years, then we could use it elsewhere first and come back to enhancing the station afterwards.
Thank you. We'll note that. Councillor Bird, please.
Chairman, we heard earlier on from Carl over there, the problems faced about rising costs. We had a change request to 2020, then 2023, and now we're asking to 2031. What in the hell does anybody think that you're going to get within the budget that you've got to get the scheme? Costs are rising on a daily and annual basis. There's just no way this can be funded in the envelope that you've got, unless there comes some outside funding from somewhere else. I just don't see it.
Oh, do you want to come back? Sorry, Con, you want to come back?
I think, Chair, I mean, I've explained how we're approaching this, you know, how I think there are other ways of achieving the outcomes, which is through, first of all, we're looking at, we're going to challenge Network Rail, first of all, in terms of their engineering standards. So, I mean, that's number one, because, you know, I think there is a, you know, a much, personally, it would seem that, you know, there is a more cost-effective scheme. I'm not a rail engineer, not a rail expert, you know, and obviously it's Network Rail's asset at the end of the day, and we have to work to their rules. But I just want to be clear, you know, we are mounting a serious challenge on that point. Secondly, we could achieve a lot of what we need to, possibly through timetable changes, and that's the work that we've commissioned Midlands Connect to do. So again, that would be a low-cost solution to bringing about the achieving the outcomes which we've been asked to achieve, you know, the enhanced services. And then thirdly, we're looking at Network Rail and their sort of, you know, longer term strategic investment, or indeed Midlands Connects for the Coventry Leicester corridor, and the, you know, and that would be a further way of achieving it. And the change request approval in 2020 clearly said that in the event that we couldn't fund it through the DFT route, then the Coventry Leicester, the Midlands Connect work was the way that we could seek to achieve it. I mean, I don't know, Simon, from a Network Rail point of view, if there's anything you can add to that.
I don't think there's much more to add, to be perfect. I'm just Network Rail in a position where we request funding as you do from the Treasury. So we, for any enhancement scheme that we're working on, we need business cases together to build support for that. What we have got is a commitment to challenge the standards, look at what the minimum viable product is going to be for the scheme, whether or not there's anything we can interim basis to provide these benefits. Once demand obviously returns in the area, then we'll continue to work with you on that. I think the acknowledgement is, you're right, we will need more money ultimately from somewhere to deliver this, the outputs for this element of work, which is will. And it's where do we find that money? And Network Rail will commit to work with you on that to find that.
Thank you. Steve, your hand's up again. Do you want to come back?
No, it's a legacy to hand, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Chairman, the point that Steve made is well made in my view. We heard that we're looking at a 58 million overspend on transport. It seems logical to me that this should be recirculated back into the system rather than tie it up for another 8 years. It just, you know, probably won't be here in 8 years, but I'm making my point now. You're right, it will when you're alive. So that's my point.
Councillor Grinsell, please.
Yeah, for me, it's this December 2031 date. A decision will potentially need to be made much sooner than that. As was said earlier, we won't be around potentially in 10 years' time, 8-10 years' time. So for me, it's the actual date, because decisions will need to clearly be made much sooner than that. And I'm just a bit unsure about the word in the recommendation, equivalent piece of infrastructure, because clearly the Bay platform, it won't necessarily be equivalent.
Yeah.
So it's just that word in there that there is a little difficulty. Oh, clearly you've mentioned the timetabling. It's a low cost solution, you said. Why aren't we getting on and doing it then? If that's it, that's the low cost solution, to get on and work on that.
That is something.
But when I don't know, I can't see, and maybe I've missed it, when that timetabling will be done.
The timetable modelling report is being undertaken at the moment.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry. The timetable modelling is being done at the moment, so that should be available.
When should that be decided?
The report will be available at the back end of July, early August time, based on the information we've been given. At that point, then it will need to go to the Network Rail team in Milton Keynes to verify and look at the timetable modelling reports to understand whether or not there are enough capacity within the system to provide those train paths. So you'd be looking at a decision on whether or not that's acceptable by around about October. Sure.
Colin.
Thanks. Yeah, just to clear up the point about equivalent infrastructure, you know, what we're seeking to do is to get additional services running Coventry to Nuneaton, Coventry, Leicester. So we need somewhere where the trains can be turned back and not interfere with through services at Coventry Station. So that can either be a bay platform at Coventry Station, or, you know, given the fact that WMRE and Network Rail are studying the potential for a Coventry East Station, the potential there is for that to include a turnback facility, which could not only serve the Coventry Nuneaton line, but could serve the Coventry corridor throughout the West Midlands as well. But if that was provided, then the need for a bay platform in the middle of Coventry would be avoided, because you would run those Nuneaton services through to a station on the eastern edge of Coventry to provide further additional journey opportunities and serve potentially a strategic park and ride. So that is, you know, a good example of what that equivalent infrastructure would be. There'd be no point then building a bay platform if the infrastructure is already there to facilitate those additional services.
Okay. The process has been gone through. It's gone through the single assurance framework, and there's a recommendation within the document to highlight that. It's also gone through the investment panel, and in fact, at 73 on the papers is the investment panel's recommendation to the board. The difficulty we have, and I'll come to the recommendation in a moment, the difficulty we have is that the benefits, and indeed what is being proposed in future, is unknown to us at this stage. So it's very difficult, and in fact the process wouldn't allow us really to be able to give a commitment of this type. I think where we are is that we could agree the long stop date to 2031. From the perspective of the board, I think it would be advisable to have a review date somewhere around about 25 to see what progress has been made with regard to the proposals. I do make the point, and I've read the report very thoroughly and spoken to officers about it. There's no question about the commitment that Coventry City Council have made to this proposal to try and enhance services through the knuckle proposal. And certainly there's an awful lot of work done, and this board is still committed to improve those services across that eastern leg. I don't think any question about that at all. But I don't think, well, in fact, I know that we are constrained in what we can do because we haven't got further details on what may be proposed with regard to an enhanced element of the scheme. So I think I'm going to recommend that we would agree the long stop date to 2031, but we would ask for a review to satisfy this board that progress has been made in March 2025. And it remains open to Coventry City Council, Network Rail, to actually bring forward any proposal that they may have with regard to an alternate provision, and it would be subject to a change request to this board under normal circumstances. So I think I would recommend to the board that that is probably the best solution today. And I would hope that the board would be satisfied with that proposal. Is there any dissent?
Yeah,
Councillor Bird?
I'm not comfortable with that, Chairman. I'd be happier if the wording were to say that between now and the date you mentioned, that they do seek alternative funding. So it's a direction rather than a request of perhaps, because I'm not comfortable with this. You know, I mean, you took 2031, it's just ridiculous. And I think there has to be some sense, because that 10 million quid can be going towards the overspending transport. And that will be in the next 12 to 24 months, not 8 years.
Yeah, I take the points. I mean, my assumption is from the comments that we made today, you know, you will be looking at the funding model to see if it's deliverable or not in the current form. Is that an assurance you can give this board to satisfy Councillor Bird's request?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, we'll be looking at all options, all funding models, and, you know, and I'd certainly be very happy to come back in March 25 to update this board and give you an update on progress. And thank you, Chair, for your comments on our commitment.
Councillor Bird?
Chairman, I'd like to see it come back sooner than that so we can see the plan. It's no good coming in 2025 and saying, yeah, we did that, but we never got anywhere near the figure, so we now need to go to 2035. I think what we need to see, and I'd like to see a report back in 6 months' time to say what is the strategy to actually redesign this or get the money from alternative sources.
I think that timeline might be too tight, to be fair. I think recognising
We waited 4 years.
well, as we also recognise, the rail industry is very complex and has to go through a large number of processes. If there were an opportunity to bring something back by way of a progress report earlier than March 25, then that would be very helpful to us going forward. But I go back to my original recommendation that we agree the long stop, subject to a report no later than March 2025 to satisfy this board that progress has been made with regard to the proposals. And I make the point, we are committed to the Bay platform and improving services across the eastern leg from Coventry, Nuneaton and Leamington Spa. We have been, I think, reasonable previously. We've allowed this funding to be utilised elsewhere for the car park, and that was right, and our commitment remains. But I do think we're obviously expressing our concern that we do need to see some progress from both Coventry City Council and Network Rail with regard to this matter going forward. Colin, are you satisfied if the board agreed that you would comply with that? Let me take Gary first. Gary, please.
Chair, just to be clear, that I would support that if we're absolutely clear that funding is, at that point, if you don't satisfy that review, that funding does revert to the pot so it can be used on other projects. It's not just another review where it gets kicked down the road. It could be a cut-off and a handback stage.
I think it would have to include a clear demonstration of progress, otherwise the board might have to consider whether it changes its position. But I think that's probably right. Councillor Grinson.
And are we sticking to the original wording?
I think what we did.
Or are we?
Yeah, so we're approving 1.
Yeah.
And 2, but we're adding the proviso of a review no later than March 2025 to demonstrate to this board that progress has been made, not least from the financial viability perspective. I think
that's not quite what I said. I'm not going to fall out with you, but I did say that within there we have a direction that they do look at alternative funding. So when it comes back to the 12-month review, if that's what it's going to be, that we need to know what strategic objectives they've gone through to see if they can fund it in other resources. Because, you know, as Gary said, it's no good going in 12 months' time and saying, oh, by the way, we need a further 3 or 4 years, because we got nowhere. So I really want that to be stronger, in as much that they have got a direction that they should seek alternative funding.
I'm just going to take advice from Ian. Ian, can you just explain where we are?
Yes, I think so we can capture that. Like Councillor Bird said, say that we'll look and reflect on the minutes that Wendy is taking. But what I'm taking at is the review must demonstrate a clear way to secure funding, the line of sight, and the strategic direction of going those funds.
Absolutely.
Words to that effect. If that can be limited, then we will work on.
I'll check the minutes.
I'm sure you will, Councillor.
Colin, are you okay?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, certainly give you an assurance we will be pursuing alternative strategies. Just to clarify, please, in terms of that being or equivalent infrastructure, because I think, you know, the commitment is to enhance services on the Coventry and Nuneaton corridor. So if, you know, we may well identify a strategy which involves perhaps achieving that same objective, but in a slightly different way.
We can't commit to that element, I'm afraid, at this stage, because we don't know what that is. So that, I think, is part of the review process going forward. I think we're extending the 2031 start days with the proviso that we've identified here. But we can't commit to something that we've not seen at this point in time. I think that's where we are.
Okay. Chairman, not wish to be awkward like normal, but, you know, I said earlier, we have to look at schemes in a priority order. And this may not be one of those. It might fall off the end. I don't know. I don't know what schemes are in the system, but, you know, 58 million quid overspend says to me that we can't afford them all. This may be one.
We won't go any further. The principle is established that we support the Bay platform to improve the service provision from east to west across from Coventry. I think that's as far as we'll go. The minutes will reflect the meeting. They will come back to this meeting at the next board, and we will then review them line by line to make sure it encompasses the intention of the board at that point. Are we all content? I think we are. Thank you. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, John. And thank you, Simon. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. Thank you. I now exclude the press and the public. In accordance with section 184 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following items of business. We'll now close the link on and goes